The Greatest Creation by me, Eli. The underground caves trembled as tens of thousands of bug like creatures quickly flew through to begin their day, or days, if they were deemed unproductive, of work for the benefit of their hive. However, just because these creatures look similar does not mean they are all doing the same thing. Geonosian society had many important roles to be filled by many of its members. Among the many that flew through this cave system is Veckan. However, unlike many of the Geonosians that zipped through this noisy atmosphere at a breakneck pace, Veckan was not gaining speed at all. He was simply flapping his wings of times per minute and keeping in the same place. It was his day to supervise the flow of the common bug like creatures' traffic to and from their jobs, and to make sure no Geonosian worker deviated even a centimeter from their designated path. He hated these days. He much preferred days where he was directly assisting his overseer, who also happened to be his personal mentor. Sun Fac was a role model to so many aspiring drones on Geonosia, which was incredibly ironic because most could never dream of reaching anywhere near as high of a status as he could. Sure, Poggle the Lesser was the Archduke, and that title carried a lot of respect and prestige. He earned it too, but that's all it was for most Geonosians. Respect. Karina was their queen. She hatched all of them and held a copious amount of control over the entire hive, no doubt about that. She had Geonosian society's immense loyalty and devotion. No one would ever dream of laying one finger against her as long as they drew breath. But Sun was a hero. Every Geonosian wanted to impress Poggle and defend Karina, but they all wanted to be Sun Fac. Who wouldn't? And that's why Veckan is so lucky. He's Sun Fac's protege, plucked from a group of a few dozen promising young Geonosian upstarts at the cusp of adulthood. They had all excelled in their labor trainings and were put through more and more rigorous trials in order to be granted the honor of being the right hand to the right hand. Veckan has been in this honored position for just over a year now, and things were proceeding today as they do any other day. Wings are flapping, technology is being tinkered with, mandibles are clicking. Everything about this day should be normal, but it isn't. There's tension in the air, a nervousness that is palpable to Veckan, yet he can't quite place where it's coming from. What is bothering the usually unfazed Geonosian worker drones so much? Veckan's instincts told him to do what they always did in a situation like this. Go to Sun. He'd have an answer. As he flew his way into where he suspected his superior would be, he saw Fac and Poggle huddled together, clicking very softly to each other. That was the first thing Veckan saw, but it was not what he focused on, that being a white-haired human who was being escorted out of the room by... Wait, are those 48112 and 48551? Veckan had recently promoted them for their exceptional service to a Geonosian noble who he was friendly with, and now they were escorting out a human? How could an outsider, who Veckan did not recognize in the slightest, already receive treatment that would have to be earned, even by many in the elite Geonosian castes? Veckan! Veckan! He was pulled back from inside his own head by Sun Fac, who was clearly growing impatient. Thank the Creator that Veckan was such a dutiful assistant to Fac, or he may have been in much bigger trouble than he is now. The Lesser just met with a noble from the prosperous world of Sereno, who came to him with news of an exciting new movement that he is starting that will bring Geonosia into the galaxy at last. Master, Veckan said, aghast, who is this Kleckbor to determine what we do here on Geonosia, and why are two of our best new drones escorting him around like he's Camkill or Gremiev? As soon as this came out of Veckan's mandibles, he knew he had crossed the line. Kleckbor was one of those rare words that was highly known throughout Geonosian society, but rarely used, at least in public. Still, Veckan was ready and willing to defend his use of the word. It wasn't just every day that outsiders came to Geonosia, let alone received an audience with their leaders. Silence! Your insolence notwithstanding, this was the Count's first contract with our people. This was a logistical meeting that I was going to debrief you on shortly anyway, but as you have barged in here, I suppose I shall just give you the rundown right now. Calm down, son. I will explain our dealings with the separatists to our zealous young acolyte here. Pavel interrupted, clearly trying to defuse a tenuous situation between mentor and protege. Count Dooku of the planet Sereno is forming a secessionist movement to break off with the hopelessly corrupt Galactic Republic, a tyrannical bureaucracy who can only take from peoples like us and not give anything in return, to form a confederacy of independent systems. Some of our drones have already started production on an army of battle droids that will decimate the Republic and bring Dooku's dream one step closer to reality. Karina has long believed that a system as atrocious as the Republic could hurt Geonosia far more than it could ever help its progress, simply by taking our most valued and cherished traditions away. But the Count's ideas of decentralization, as well as his ardent desire to bring down the Republic, align a great deal with the Creator's doctrine. Vecin rarely spoke with the Lesser directly, so he often forgot what a gifted orator the man was. He broke down this seemingly blasphemous idea very logically and tied it back to Geonosian values without breaking a sweat. His little speech would have normally persuaded Vecin in a heartbeat, but something about this still felt wrong. Geonosians were taught from a very young age that their species alone understands the Creator's doctrine, and that anyone not from Geonosia that claims to is a false prophet or charlatan. Geonosians had worked with other species before, sure, but pledging allegiance to a political alliance? That was unheard of. Poggle could not detect any of this reluctance from Vecin, though, and quickly flew away to perform his other archducal duties. Sun, however, knew his mentee far better. This is a risky step forward for Geonosia, hatchling. I agree. However, I also believe that great risk can yield great reward. As my master has said, Geonosia's entrance into the Confederacy has been approved by the great Karina herself, and her word is our command. Fak ended his statement triumphantly. Her word is our command, Feckin agreed, although deep down he still had a very bad feeling about this. 1 year later. Those Republic dogs! Mechgin was ruined. Drinks and merriment and the celebration of Geonosian industry and ingenuity meant nothing to these heathens. Shame on them. The Creator will judge them exceedingly harshly in Griikonga, where they belong. All these thoughts flooded through Vekin's mind as he flew rapidly through archaic tunnels and back routes in the catacombs of the Stalgassan hive. This is what happens when off-worlders take an interest in Geonosia. They always bring friends and then enemies. Some Republic senator and her friends had come to their world and trespassed in their hive, and then Vekin's master sentenced them to death, and then the Republic's shiny new army invaded the hive, and then form up, squad. We've got some more bugs to deal with. Vecin heard from what sounded like 50 meters away. Shit. That's why he was in this situation to begin with, to hide from this new army. Apparently, however, the Republic had caught up with many Geonosians' plans and started to scour the catacombs. This was not good. Vecin dashed back and forth through various tunnels, but the voices of that soldier and many other soldiers who sounded suspiciously similar to each other kept on getting closer and closer. Although Geonosians could not speak the language that many denizens of the galaxy referred to as basic, many, including practically all of the elite class, could understand it, and Vecin was no exception. Vecin knew he had to lose the Republic soldiers. Through the frantic pace of his escape, he was startled by sounds of explosions and blaster fire. Vecin had never felt more terrified in his life, and that fear was only growing by the second. As he was flying away, a new fear started to build inside him. What if Geonosia? What will the corrupt Republic do with the hallowed traditions of the Hive? What will remain of Meccan, of the Creator's doctrine, of any precious piece of culture that Geonosians hold so dear once those Republic bureaucrats get their filthy hands on it? Veckin's fear was turning deep and primal by the second. He could not remember a time in his life where he had felt as terrified as he does now. Vecin heard a piercing shriek from a Geonosian that sounded fairly close to him. It stopped him completely in his flight path, partially because of how horrifying it sounded, but also because he thought he knew who that screech came from. He darted in another direction, towards where he heard the shriek, as fast as he could. He didn't want to believe. No, he couldn't believe his instincts around who it came from. He turned the corner into a small cave. It was dimly lit, with a small fire in the corner, likely sparked by a flamethrower of some kind, and had some offshoot tunnels leading into other parts of the catacombs. Vecin was sure he had been in dozens of rooms just like this one ever since he began to flee from the Republic invasion. But it wasn't the room that scared him so much. It was the body of Sun Fac, lying near the northernmost tunnel, that immediately caught his eye. Vecin rushed towards a bona fide hero of Geonosian society that also happened to be his mentor, with despair coursing through him. Sun seemed to be practically immobile, and as Vecin got closer, he saw a liquid stain on the floor that seemed to come from. Oh no. As he rolled the body of the most important person in his life over, he saw the yellow blood rushing from Sun's abdomen. Though losing life by the second, Sun did seem to be conscious enough to recognize his protege. As Vecin was looking over Sun's body to examine the extent of the damage, it started to move, although very slightly. Vecin stared back into his mentor's eyes as Sun's mandibles clicked 4 times, the equivalent in the Geonosian hive mind language to one word: run. After he said that, with his ward towering over his body, Sunfac dropped back to the ground and died. Stunned by the demise of someone who had meant so much to him, Vecin remained there above the body for a minute or so before he started to hear footsteps approaching. It was then that Vecin really started to register his mentor's last word. Sunfac didn't die. Sunfac was murdered, and those terrorists who had killed him were still out there, and they would soon be hunting him too. Grief temporarily flipped back yet again to blinding fear as Vecin flew out of that cave as fast as he possibly could. However, as he got to the tunnel from which he entered the cave in the first place, streaks of blue light passed through the cave behind him. None of them hit him, but Vecin briefly saw a shadow cast on a wall in front of him, and Fluke was that Republic soldier who shot at him large. Most of the Republic soldiers that he had seen were the size of average humans, but this one was quite a bit taller than that. Although maybe it was just the shadow's distorted proportions. He could never really know for sure. "I caught a bug trying to escape from Fac's body," a voice came from the direction of the figure, now getting quieter as Vecin was flying away. "Should I go after him?" the voice asked. The duration between that question and a different voice's answer may have been the longest, however long it was, of Vecin's life. "No need. We'll leave him for the regs to take care of. That's what they're here for," the second voice responded. With that, the distance between Vecin and those Republic soldiers kept growing. He could now go back to slightly more long-term plans, like finding a decent place to hide until the brunt of the invasion had passed. In the coming rotations, Vecin would pray to the Creator, pray that fortune would smile on Geonosia once again, and that the legendary Sunfac's death would not be in vain. 3 years later, much had transpired since the death of Sunfac. The Republic had invaded Geonosia a second time. Its industry had completely changed its operations under Republic domination, and the Stalgassan Hive had formally exited the Separatist Alliance. However, that third one was really only true in name, as most in the elite circles knew that Poggle, who was currently off-world, hidden away with the rest of the Separatist Council, still retained a deep connection to Geonosian society and industry. However, in Poggle's absence, the other nobles were forced to form a ruling council of sorts. After the death of Sunfac during the First Republic invasion of Geonosia, Vecin had technically been demoted, now working as the assistant to Gremiev Siltruk, a Geonosian noble who was on the ruling council. However, any shame about this demotion was far from the top of Vecin's mind. Geonosia had, as he had been afraid of all this time, crumbled since the dual Republic invasions, less than a year apart from each other. Geonosian industry had been far less productive, as many worker drones had either been killed in the battles, or they had survived and simply couldn't sustain doing 2 or 3 times the work that they used to. And then there were those brutal riots last Mekyan that allowed Poggle to escape Republic custody so that he could rejoin the Separatists. In Poggle's defense, if that's what it took to get him away from the tyrannical arm of the Republic, so be it. But the move did still have consequences. But the main problem was this project that the Geonosians had worked on since the Republic takeover, the ultimate weapon. Just prior to the Republic's first invasion, Poggle had his designers, in collaboration with off-worlders from the corporation Bactoid Combat Automata, form blueprints for this weapon. He would later pitch this project to Geonosian nobles as being the hallmark of his time as Archduke, the legacy that he wanted to leave after he was gone, Geonosia's greatest creation. Had this project been started even 5 years prior, Vecin probably would have supported it. But he had looked at data that Geonosian drones had gathered alongside Bactoid workers, and quickly discovered that, on top of the vast amount of resources that had already been gathered from Geonosia to produce large swaths of the Separatist armada, the full production of the ultimate weapon would drain Geonosia's core dry, and Geonosian industry would likely die out within a few generations. If Geonosians were using such a weapon for themselves, that would be one thing. They could use the battle station to plunder other systems for their resources. But then the meddling Republic found out about the project and placed it under their control. Even if it fell out of Republic control, it could be known to the entire galaxy if even one off-worlder let something slip. Poggle had been reckless, both with his trust in outsiders and his ambitions for this ultimate weapon. It was already costing Geonosian society in some subtle ways, but Vecin knew that in just 10 to 15 years, it could start costing Geonosian societies in some much unsubtler ways. All of this caused Vecin to do something exceptionally un-Geonosian: start asking questions. He knew that Geonosia and Geonosians could do better than this. Geonosian society needed a radical shift if they were to prosper like they had for generations. He had started a few weeks ago, asking some simple operational questions to a lot of Geonosians under Gremyev's command, and therefore his authority. He had planned to go to the Big Bug himself and ask him questions about how Geonosian society was proceeding in a few weeks, if all went well with his underlings. As Vecin started to get work overseeing his duties for Gremyev that day, he was quickly approached by a drone who informed him that Gremyev wanted to speak to him as soon as possible. Such a request was rare at the beginning of the day, but not unheard of. As Vecin flew into Gremyev's study, he noticed the Geonosian elite staring at a holoprojector that was displaying the HoloNet, an exceedingly rare sight on Geonosia. Geonosians mostly paid little to no attention to galactic politics and major events, being an incredibly isolationist society due to their societal distrust of outsiders. The HoloNet was displaying a symbol that Vecin had never seen before. It sort of looked like the symbol of the Republic, but it was different.
Vecin, come here,
Gremyev said flatly. His eyes were filled with a strange sense of despair, an emotion Vecin seldom saw in any Geonosian elite, given that they were the ones reaping the rewards of Geonosian industry.
The Republic is no more. Poggle is dead. So are all of the Separatist leaders. The thin veil on the Republic's tyranny has officially been torn off. They now call themselves the Galactic Empire,
Gremyev said with a grave sense of foreboding. What does that mean for us? Vecin asked, still trying to comprehend the magnitude of what his master just told him.
No one knows yet, but one thing is for sure. Nothing good,
Gremyev replied. Vecin paused for a second as he realized that this new Galactic Empire's tyranny could mean more danger for Geonosia, specifically in the form of the ultimate weapon. Master Gremyev, I need to discuss something with you. 6 years later. Conversations had turned into more conversations, had turned into plans, and contingency plans had turned into a whole operation, hidden in secret from the rest of Geonosian society. And all of it had come from one simple question. What if we could do better? Operation Ukaraku, named after the Geonosian word for rebirth, now nearly 6 years old and just about ready to commence, was an ambitious project, to say the very least, but Vecin believed now, more than ever, that it was necessary to secure a future for the Geonosian people. Frankly, it was nothing short of a miracle to Vecin that this project had stayed as secret as it was. The biggest victory he had in foundational support was from his old master, Gremyev Siltruk. Vekin was now a full-fledged noble himself, but had little influence in traditional Geonosian society. However, what he lacked in influence there, he more than made up for with Ukeraku, led by both him and Gremiev, and consisting of a few lesser nobles, many warriors, and even more drones. Vekin estimated that in a few months the operation would be ready to commence. Those in the know would leave Geonosia in the first mass departure in the planet's history. They would do so on a miniaturized and modified Lucrehulk-class battleship, constructed from plans that Gremiev had stealthily scanned during a meeting between Geonosian nobles and Hirsch Kessel Drive Inc., the corporation that manufactured the capital ships. After they left the planet, they would then search for a deserted planet or moon to start anew on. There, they could build a new Geonosian society, one that worked better for all of them, away from the influence of the Galactic Empire and the Ultimate Weapon. The clarity of purpose behind Ukeraku raced through Vekin's mind as he crept into the last place he thought he'd ever find himself trying to infiltrate, the lair of their queen, Karina the Great. The mission was clear. Grab some of Karina's eggs so that, once Ukeraku launched, they could rest easy knowing that the future of Geonosian society was secure. When the eggs hatched, the new queens could reproduce on the new world that they inhabited to sustain the new society. The queen was sleeping, and all Vekin had to do while stealing the eggs was not wake her up. That was it. Easier said than done, of course. However, Vekin was not going in completely unprepared. He had some contingency plans. At least 2 of the guards outside were affiliated with Ukeraku, so they could delay Karina's response if she was woken up. Vekin looked at his box and counted quite a few eggs. He knew he had to get out, and get out fast. Box in hand, he burst out of Karina's sleeping quarters as fast as he could. He hovered near the ground as he flew, so that if he, creator forbid, dropped the box, he could pick it up quickly and continue his escape. He had less than half a meter towards the door. This was it. Less than a minute, and he could stop stressing so hard about this particular... The bottom of Vekin's left wing grazed a small boulder that rested on one of the walls of the room and caused it to fall to the ground. The noise it made was not that substantial, but apparently it was enough to wake Karina, who bolted from her slumber, shrieking of an intruder in her room. Although the situation was the exact one Vekin was trying his hardest to avoid, he paused only for the briefest of moments before getting out of Karina's quarters and quickly calling for the guards on his side, 76742 and 77811, to delay any response from Karina. He saw a few dozen Geonosians flying through the air to assist the startled queen. Of course, many of the lower castes of Geonosians were still working when the queen was sleeping, so as Vekin flew through the hive like a bullet with a box of eggs, he was able to blend in with all the other bugs quite easily. However, he was feeling far from relieved, even as he approached the secret room containing the Lucrehulk-class battleship, which was named the Exodus by him and Gremiev a few months ago. Operation Ukeraku needed to be accelerated quickly and take off as soon as possible. He didn't like it, but he knew it needed to happen. He calmed Gremiev as soon as he got to the Lucrehulk. Gremiev, Karina was tipped off right as I escaped her room with the eggs. We need to immobilize and escape now.
You know we're not ready, Vekin.
Is there any way we can delay this, even just a rotation longer? Gremiev responded, clearly on high alert, probably from hearing the commotion started by the intrusion. No, if Exodus doesn't launch by the end of this rotation, it's never getting off Geonosia. Trust me on this, Vekin said back, getting more agitated by the second. They were losing time. Although he'd not specifically thought today of all days would be when the Exodus would take off, Vekin had anticipated an early departure could be in their future. So, just after the Exodus was completed, he had secret comlinks manufactured for all the thousands of Geonosians who were on board Operation Ukeraku, so that he could notify them if anything went south with their plans. And now, he knew, was the time to finally use them. Vekin used his comlink to feed the signal for an early departure to all the other Operation Ukeraku Geonosians, also informing them of the location that the Exodus was taking off, in a secret tower of the Stalgassan Hive. Crestjor, he commanded to his own protege, prepare the Exodus for launch. Operation Ukeraku begins now. Not 5 minutes after he gave that command, as Crestjor and his team were still making sure systems were operational on the Exodus, Gremiev entered the tower with a few of his drones behind him, gasping, clearly almost out of breath.
Many of the Ukeraku followers are on their way here. However, we may have a bit of a problem.
What, Gremiev? Vekin asked worriedly.
Look outside.
Gremiev said, pointing at one of the gaps in the tower that acted as a window to the outside world. As Vecin did just that, he could not believe what he saw. The sky was full of Geonosians. Tens of thousands of bugs filled the sky, the vast majority carrying weaponry of some kind. These ranged from simple spears and pikes all the way to sonic blasters and pistols of all varieties. It seems a great portion of the Stalgasson hive had taken a brief recess from the factories to quell Operation Ukaraku. However, the most notable thing had nothing to do with what Vecin saw, but what he heard. He had never heard a louder clamor, even on the rowdiest of Mechans. Even that time Poggle escaped Republic custody. The wild, unruly sound of all these Geonosians shrieking as they came to stop Vecin and his operation was so deafening that Vecin figured it would frighten even the bravest of Jedi Knights. It was at this moment that Vecin realized how big of a fight it would be to launch the Exodus off of Geonosia. But they had to try. Vecin activated his comlink, relaying a message to everyone who had one. Followers of Ukaraku, get onto the Exodus. We must leave Geonosia as soon as possible. Then, after he made sure the eggs were secure on the Exodus, Vecin grabbed a sonic blaster from a trunk and started shooting at many of his fellow Geonosians who had already begun pelting the tower with fire. Many Geonosians started to board the Exodus. As the battle between these two factions of Geonosians began, Vecin figured he'd just have to trust those that boarded to be loyal to the plan of Ukaraku, or become loyal quickly. Quite a few of them attempted to profusely thank Vecin or Gremiev, but both urged them to save the thanks for later and focus on getting on the ship and getting it operational. The battle was complete and utter mayhem. As Ea rose in the sky, blue, green, and yellow streaks accompanied it as the battle for the future of Geonosia raged on. Geonosians on both sides were going down by the minute. Explosions rattled the towers of the Stalgasson hive, debris falling everywhere. And then there was the swarm. Geonosians just kept coming and coming and coming. Drones, warriors, guards, mechanics, engineers, even brute alphas and some of the elite class could be seen flying out to quash Ukaraku before it could take off. The shrieking of all of the Geonosians coming to attack them alone was just unbearable for Vecin to listen to, even as someone who is surrounded by thousands of these bugs a day. The yellow liquid could frequently be seen pouring out of injured or dead Geonosians. Vecin could also see ground infantry being set up, AATs, homing spider droids, even hailfire droid tanks being deployed by Geonosians against Geonosians. The brutality of this battle was soul-crushing to Vecin. He still believed in the cause of Ukaraku, of course, but he hated seeing how many Geonosians had to die to make it a reality. Although things looked bleak, Vecin was, at the same time, heartened to see all the Geonosians who successfully boarded the Exodus, bringing their hopes and dreams of a better future for them and their fellow Geonosians along with them. This further strengthened his hope that they could get off the planet, if not for him, for them. Some of Vecin's closest allies gathered around him to form a partial wall around the Exodus, resolving to hold off the mainline Geonosians long enough to get the Exodus in flight. Are you still committed to this, Vecin? Gremiev asked as he stood aside Vecin, shooting off blasts from a pulse rifle. We are getting off this looking planet, Vecin said, as firmly as he could, although on the inside he was still panicking. He saw Geonosians falling all around him and wondered if there would be enough on the Exodus for Ukaraku to succeed, if it even took off. He quickly pushed that thought out of his mind as he blasted a few more mainline Geonosians. A cannon shot flew right by Gremiev. Vecin was relieved it didn't hit his friend and old master, but he didn't have much time to think about it because the mainline Geonosians that were joining the field were now being armed with rocket launchers, thermal detonators, and heavier-duty blasters and cannons. Towers and other massive sections of the Stalgasson hive were crumbling by the minute, with a massive cloud of dust forming up to a few meters off the ground. The devastation to Geonosians' facilities was immense and was only growing the longer the battle went on. And on it went as the Geonosian body count piled up. Both sides fought harder and harder as it intensified. This battle would go down in history as long as the Geonosian species survived. The battle had been going on for 30 minutes or so when Krestor alerted Vecin that the Exodus was fueled up and ready to go. Vecin calmed all the Geonosians on his network. The Exodus is fueled up and departing immediately. You have 5 minutes to get on before we depart Geonosia for good. 5 minutes later, the Exodus flew up into the skies of Geonosia. A few Geonosian starfighters tried to tail it and shoot it down, but the hull was just too strong for the starfighters to cause any real damage. Once they were in space, Crestor alerted Vecin that the hyperdrive was ready to make the jump to the first uninhabited system that they had identified could meet their needs. Vecin looked back at the many, many Geonosians on the Exodus. He saw the anticipation in their eyes as they celebrated this new age of Geonosian society. For the first time in a long time, he felt an emotion that, like his urge to question all those years ago, was very un-Geonosian. Hope. With great resolve for the future ahead, Vecin borrowed a phrase he had heard Republic pilots use during the Clone War and told his protege Crestor, "Punch it." Mexius Stellato was not the kind of politician that you might expect to have secrets. Granted, there aren't that many politicians that people would expect to have secrets, but Mexius Stellato seemed to hold his entire life in front of a holo camera. No one would have suspected that one day, while eating at a local restaurant, he would meet a beautiful Rin woman named Orinori. The two would quickly fall deeply in love over the next few months. When Senator Delato was with Orinori, he felt like he was the most powerful person in the galaxy, despite still being in his first term in the Galactic Senate, representing a planet that, although rapidly growing, was nowhere near the status of a core world. The Rin, however, were highly persecuted across the galaxy. Many were enslaved, and even the ones who were not were often heavily discriminated against and sometimes even hunted, depending on what planet they were on. Although Ikta was fairly welcoming in its own culture, Mexius and Orinori quickly realized that being in a public relationship would only put a target on her back for those prejudiced against her people. So they kept the relationship secret. Further complicating matters, Orinori soon became pregnant with their child, and although Mexius promised to do everything to support her and their son, she knew that their son's existence would only complicate the matter of their secrecy. She reminded Mexius of this just minutes after Foxim's birth, and he did what he always did, shrugged it off and reassured her that it would not be as difficult as she thought. The next day, he jetted back to Coruscant to get back to his work at the Galactic Senate. Orinori would never see her secret lover and the mother of her son again. The next time she heard his name, it would be from the HoloNet, pronouncing him dead, supposedly from crashing his speeder due to an alcohol overdose. Orinori knew something was off, as Mexius had told her of his allergy to alcohol early in their relationship. That detail would disturb Orinori until her dying day. Despite some bullying and discrimination because of his status as a half-Rin, Foxim Delato would grow up with a mostly happy life on Ikta. With his mother, who became the owner of a local diner, he developed a nice little community, making many friends along the way. The discrimination and harassment only became worse in his late teenage years when, just after the end to a destructive galaxy-wide conflict that thankfully never came to Ikta, the Galactic Republic was transformed into the Galactic Empire. This was done by an old colleague of Foxim's father Mexius, Senator-turned-Chancellor, now-turned-Emperor Sheev Palpatine. Conditions on Ikta became worse for both Orinori and Foxim, who often got into fights and received many minor injuries simply because of the Empire's incredibly xenophobic anti-alien propaganda. Luckily for him, Foxim found a man who loved him just the way he was. As they fell in love, Feyrog in Fel also persuaded him and his mother to become more outspoken against the Empire. A rebellion was growing, and Feyrog wanted to support it, even if neither he nor Foxim and Orinori were much of fighters. So Orinori's restaurant became a hub on Ikta for rebel activity. Rebel broadcasts were played, sympathizers were given safe refuge and passage, and aside from a minor Imperial raid on the restaurant while they were all off-world getting supplies and ingredients, things were going quite well. They complicated slightly when Foxim and Feyrog had a baby girl they named Serlisti, but they made it work. However, strange things started to happen around Serlisti. Falls that she had that she should have been hurt by strangely resulted in no bruises or scrapes, almost like something was cushioning her fall. Around when Serlisti was 5, Feyrog told Foxim that he could have sworn he saw a bull levitating a few centimeters in the air right next to her. The most peculiar thing that happened, however, was when she was 8. It was a bustling day in the restaurant. Everything was going as usual. Suddenly, Sir Listy told Foxim to turn on the holonet because she could feel something big was about to happen. Perplexed, Foxim turned on the holonet, and not 10 seconds later, reports came in that the second Death Star had been destroyed, Emperor Palpatine and his right hand, Darth Vader, had been killed, and the Rebel Alliance had the best chance in some time of defeating the Galactic Empire. As celebrations rippled out across the restaurant, city, and planet, Foxim couldn't help but stare at his little girl, transfixed at how she was able to predict something before it happened. Several years later, Foxim and Feyrog figured out that Sir Listy was strong in the Force. The timing of this discovery was apt as well, as hero of the rebellion and Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker was attempting to restart the Jedi Order. However, Foxim and Feyrog were reluctant to lose their daughter to the life of a Jedi Knight, and Sir Listy ultimately felt content with a simpler, less dramatic life on Ikta. She quickly discovered that there were other ways of wielding her gifts of the Force, and worked for many years at a local hospital, utilizing her talent as well as traditional medical practices to heal those who were sick or injured. A few years after her grandmother, Orin Ori, passed away, the First Order destroyed the New Republic on Hosnian Prime and started their takeover of the galaxy. Due to her status as both a Rin and a Force-sensitive, Sir Listy went into hiding with some other persecuted people in one of the rural areas of Ikta. The year of the war between the First Order and Resistance was the scariest year of her life. But Sir Listy became incredibly inspired by a young woman with a blue lightsaber that she saw on the holonet. The minute that Sir Listy Delato saw Rey fighting for the Resistance, she knew that they would cross paths one day. It was a feeling that she couldn't quite describe other than to say it was destiny calling. This long and storied history is what brought Sir Listy Delato, now in her late 30s, to her father's house a few weeks after the first and final orders were defeated on Exegol. Foxim and Feyrog Delato were old men now, and as their daughter was a fully independent woman, this visit was not to ask for their permission for what she was about to do. It was simply to say goodbye. She opened the door to the simple cottage where her fathers lived. They were, as always, delighted to see their daughter, even though they spent over a year in close quarters with her as they too hid from the First Order. Of course, she was their daughter, so no amount of seeing her was too much for them. The exchange between them was fairly straightforward, although it was poignant and bittersweet. They understood that she felt she had to go out, even though they did not quite understand the nature of what was compelling her to leave. After a tearful goodbye filled with many embraces, Sir Listy Delato headed out the door, telling her fathers one last time, "I am off to become a Jedi."